Ngeba Sojola here. Now, when one looks deep into the history of Sudan, right, a country in Africa known as Sudan, right, you find in the history a lot of coups, right, a lot of military style takeovers. For example, there was a coup in 1958, right? There was another coup in 1969. There was another coup, right, in 1985, right? But particularly in this video, we'll be focusing on the coup which occurred in 1989, which was basically led by a general known as Omar al-Bashir, right? So Omar al-Bashir is a general that belongs to the SAF. The SAF is the Sudanese Armed Forces, right? The main army of the Sudanese government. So he comes into the office, right? And he has a clear understanding of the history, the type of history that exists in this country of endless coups, right? Particularly after every 10 years, there seems to be a coup in Sudan, right? So al-Bashir, with the understanding of this culture, right, and history of the country, he tends to comes up with a strategy that will render him and his government coup proof. Now, coup proofing, right, is when a leader surrounds himself with a number of protectors, right, that keep each other in check. So, the first phase of coup proofing that Omar al Bashir basically planned out was with the Sudanese army, right? Sudan Armed Forces, right? Now, Omar al Bashir depended very much on the Sudanese armed forces to crack on the civil war which was occurring in the southern parts of the country. Now, as they were doing this, Omar al Bashir made sure that he created a very strong relationship with the army, even bolstering them, giving them what they need, making sure that they are happy during the civil war which occurred in the southern parts of Sudan. Now, as I remember, that civil war, which particularly took place in the southern parts of Sudan, right, was particularly very brutal, right, to a point where the country called South Sudan, right, was arched out of this violence and basic endless war, right? So in 9 July 2011, a referendum was conducted by these parts of the countries and an independent country was born. This independent country is known as South Sudan, right? South Sudan managed to somehow scrape up most of the oil reserves that Sudan has, meaning that Sudan lost a lot of oil resources to the new country which appeared, South Sudan. Now, the second aspect of Omar al Bashir's method of coup proofing, right, has to do with a rebellion that was starting to take root in the region known as Darfur, right, still in Sudan, right. There was a rebellion by the locals, right, claiming that the central government does not actually focus on them, right? So a guerrilla warfare took place in Darfur. Now, instead of Omar al-Bashir sending the Sudanese armed forces to go and crack down on the uprising which was occurring in Darfur, right? He instead, right, decides to arm certain local groups to fight certain militias which have appeared, right, with this voice of discontent. So around 2003, Omar al-Bashir started arming a militia group known as the Janjaweed, right? Started giving them a lot of arms to fight the rebels or the militias which were trying to rebel against the central government. So in this group, right, known as the Janjaweed, there's a man that Omar al-Bashir trusts very much to protect him against the Sudanese armed forces, right? This man is known as General Mohammed Hemeti Dagalo. So I think General Dagalo was the leader of this Janjaweed, right? And they performed a very good job in executing the instructions that Omar al-Bashir gave them in regards to Darfur, right? So this paramilitary group did work to with this paramilitary group did work with the Sudanese army, particularly in Darfur. But the main culprits in the violence, right, that was happening in Darfur are the Janjaweed, led by General Dagalo. So in 2013, right, Omar al-Bashir decides to basically create a new military, paramilitary group, right, known as the RSF, right? RSF stands for the Rapid Support Forces, right? Now, these rapid support forces were to answer and take instructions from al Bashir only, right? Not from the Sudanese army, right? So he has created yet a military entity, right, that exists on the side that can check the military, right? And in the same breath, the military can check on them, right? So this is what coup proofing is: surrounding yourself with protectors, right, that will put themselves in check, right, and protect you in the process. So al-Bashir trusted Dagalo to a point where he actually financed a number of his businesses, right? Particularly in the mining industry, mining gold, particularly the gold mining industry, right? He became a very successful businessman. I'm referring to Dagalo, right? And he became a very influential man, particularly around the region, the Middle Eastern region. He had connections in Libya, also had connections in UAE, and some countries around the Middle East. So Omar al-Bashir basically had the Rapid Support Forces, right, keeping in check the Sudanese armed forces. And he had the Sudanese armed forces keeping in check the Rapid Support Forces. Now, this is what is believed that made Omar al-Bashir last in office, right? His tactic of coup proofing, right? He was nearly in office for about 30 years as compared to the other um, regimes or other leaders which spend an average of about 10 years.